All right, guys, that's number two. I think it's time to move on to number three. We've given the new kids a fair,
We
fair
did.
hearing out there. So we're gonna once again go in a very different direction. Album number three, and Josh gets the first take on this. But before we take it there, Matt, will you introduce and run the numbers for us?
All right, so this is the Sugar Cubes with Life's Too Good. It comes in at number 298 in the 1980s on Best Ever Albums, number 31 in 1988, number 1901 of all time. It is the Sugar Cubes' highest rated album on Best Ever Albums, and the Sugar Cubes are ranked number 1323 of overall artist rankings on Best Ever Albums. This album is not ranked on Rolling Stone's list.
Yeah, I did not know anything about this band, and then I found out that this was Bjork's entree into music, I suppose, and before she went solo. And I was pleasantly surprised by this album. I always thought of Bjork as, the weird Icelandic artist. One of my music video memories of her is that video with the bear. That always freaked me out.
Human behavior. Yeah.
As a kid.
Human behavior.
But this is a very catchy album. There's kind of I don't know, like an offbeat polyrhythmic nature to it. It's kind of retro new wave. I got a lot of like B-52 vibes off of this album too, or like the Bangles or something. And there's a slight ska nature to some of the songs, like Motor Crash, and they're not afraid to throw in horns and kind of unique instrumentation. And it's got this combo of Bjork's unique voice, which I think works really well for this album. It's kind of like, this is like Icelandic pop, or what I imagine Icelandic pop to be, because
it is Icelandic pop. This is like what I think introduced people to, like, the fact that Iceland existed in general.
Yeah,
so.
yeah, but I guess what I'm saying is Iceland, because it's Iceland, it's got a unique twist on the pop sound, and I think and coupled with her voice, coupled with the other with the male singer's voice on this, and he's kind of got this like monotone, what you would think of like with, I don't know, Ace of Base or something, even though they're not Icelandic. The Euro
or
kind
kraut
of sound.
rock.
Yeah.
Like what I think, yeah.
Where he's
Showroom dummies, like
exactly.
Level. Yeah,
yes, that's a good comparison point. So between those two voices, it's got this kind of alluring sound to it. At least it did for me. It's got good grooves on times on songs like Cold Sweat, and off kilter, offbeat like lyrics and sounds, song titles. And it's something that was pleasant to listen to. I was kind of, I was expecting something maybe more avant-garde with what little I know of Bjork and kind of like her aesthetic and stuff. But this is very listenable and was a fun listen, and I didn't get to listen to it as much as I wanted to. This was one of the higher rated albums this week for me. But yeah, thumbs up for me. It's got an interesting variety of sounds, and it's just Bjork is like a perfect lead kind of person for capturing what they're trying to do. And if you like Bjork or like pop music, I imagine you will like this album. So thumbs up for me.
Yeah, this was definitely an interesting one. I know a decent amount of Bjork, but I never really delved into the Sugar. I knew it was. I thought of it as like a vehicle for Iceland and a vehicle for her to break out. And I knew that they were more alt rock than they were dance. Like is what I think of like Bjork, right? Like
Yeah.
like more like 90s Bjork. I always think of as like, in the same lane as like Massive Attack and Tricky and that type of music, right? Like it's some drum and bass type stuff along the ways. But yeah, this one has a lot more in common with Jesus and Mary Chain. I think is like something that immediately came to me. It also was similar to like a little bit of like what Sinead O'Connor sounded like. I thought in terms of references, but it was very much its own thing as well. Like it really didn't completely track with anything we did. And I think that's because, as you mentioned, Josh, the interesting combination of Bjork's, like, you know, they always said like fairy in the woods type vibe, but there's like a childlike impishness to like Bjork's voice, right? That kind of pierces through whenever you can't ignore her voice. It's just there. And then, you know, I think his name is Einar Orn is the other singer, yeah. And I like there are certain songs that I think are very interesting and got stuck in my head quite a bit. Like "Sick for Toys" comes to mind. It's like he's singing about it's funny too because it's like very much like English spoken by someone for whom English is the second language. So a lot of it is like very literal descriptions of it, like she needs a new toy, a brand new toy. She's tired of toys, you know, where like it's very funny, like in that sense, and then, you know, that's going on, and so like and it's like, you know, you get
or Delicious, you know, Demon. That's another one that was like
Delicious Demon, so like that, right? And then you get Bjork coming in like sick for toys, you know, and it's like you're kind of like the first time I listened to it, it was like jarring at times, the juxtaposition of those two voices, while you've got sort of you know, another band they sounded like a little bit was Killing Joke. Was another band that, like, thinking back to that album that we covered, there was some elements of it, like sort of there's like a distorted quality at times to what's going on, but then like a very crystalline quality at other times. But yeah, this is very much an alt rock album. It is not as arty, Josh, as I thought it was going to be. It's definitely takes some chances, but I was expecting it to be more out in left field, but it really isn't. It's pretty standard issue 1988 indie rock, and not in a bad way, but it's much more mainstream than I would have thought something coming from a very underground Iceland scene, right? With a group of artists would make. In that sense, it's kind of very much in the tradition of all of these groups that followed the Velvet Underground and Joy Division and the Stooges and all the other acts, right, that are the proto elements of it. So I didn't know how Matt was going to feel about this one. I thought you might like this one, Josh. I was kind of baffled as to how Matt would feel. What'd you think, Matt?
So first of all, I will say, when I first listened to this, I listened to this probably twice before I realized that Bjork was the lead singer, and not because
Really?
I didn't, and not because my initial thought was, it's funny you mentioned the B-52s, because I think early on, maybe it was, I don't know if it was the first or second song, but I was thinking Katy Pearson a little bit. I was like, you know, there was a little bit of that. There's a B-52s kind of sound to this, and then as I was listening more and more, I'm like, no, this lady sounds like Bjork. Right? I'm like, oh, it's kind of like, all right, it's just some, and I was just attributing it like, oh, it's somebody that's kind of got like a Bjork-like sound, you know? And
right,
then it was,
like your reference points.
Yeah, and then like during my third listen, I pulled up the lyrics, and like that's the other weird thing. So the lyrics, there's some of the songs on here where they're trading off, like it's Bjork singing and then it's the guy, and then they say if it's Bjork singing, it says Bjork right there, like before the lyrics, like on the Spotify app. So I said, oh, this is Bjork. Okay, that's why it sounds like her, because it freaking is her. So,
in fairness, at least one or two people would have a hard time figuring out who the two different lead singers are, Matt. So,
yeah, well, yes. So I was like, no, I was, my instinct was right that it was her. I just didn't, because I didn't know she was in a band. I thought she just was a solo artist.
Yeah,
so
I never thought of that.
I was like, okay, so Bjork had a band, the SUGARCUBES. All right. So obviously I had no idea about this, but this was a great album. This was the more I listened to this, the more I liked it. And it's got a lot of interesting, again, it's a post-punk record, right? I just saw it's labeled post-punk. So there you go. That continues its dominance of really great albums that we've covered this decade, and just really interesting. She's got a really unique voice. I read somewhere she's got 3 octaves. Like her voice ranges 3 octaves, which is insane. That you can like do like complete octaves, you know, like not just like hitting them, but like she can get all the notes in each one. So yeah, lots of interesting. I was picking up on some of the touch points from bands that we've covered already, like Gang of Four on a song like Blue Eyed Pop. Seems like that guitar sound is a very Gang of Four and then the bass comes in and it, kind of makes it their own thing a little bit. But there's some elements of that there. I also laughed at Sick for Toys, that just the overly, pronunciation of toys. I was almost thinking that initially I thought the guy was German or something, because it's like this kind of like a German sounding accent. But Delicious Demon's a great song. Motor Crash Birthday, it starts off really strong. I think maybe the last couple of like Fucking in Rhythm and Sorrow, and then there's a hidden track.
Sounds like a mistranslation of something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like they just, so that maybe not as good, but I still liked it. And it says on here that the last track on Wikipedia, it's listed as it was a hidden track on the CD, which we're probably, because we're starting
some petrol.
Yeah, taking some petrol. Take some petrol, darling. Because the 90s is when we started getting on the CDs the hidden tracks, right? And sometimes it was like, I remember on Nevermind, that's like you're listening to 12 minutes before you, or something ridiculous like that, before you get into their hidden track. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, probably within Spotify, that they're just going to go to it. You're not going to have to wait a ridiculous amount of time for some hidden track. So I thought that was, maybe this is the first hidden track that we've come across in our podcast. But the more I listened to this, the more I liked it. It is kind of an art rock alternative type album, an indie rock type album, but it's not, I don't think it didn't take me very long to find a groove. I think initially I was a little off put. I was kind of trying to figure out what they were going for, because it wasn't as, I guess I was thinking it was going to be a little bit more straightforward than it was. So a little bit of that was, for whatever reason, that's just what I was expecting for some reason. But as it went on, I really liked it, and I appreciated Bjork's voice. I thought it was cool. I think it's cool that she was in a band, and kind of had this opportunity to work with other people in this type of setting. But I don't think there's really a bad song on here. It's another great interesting record. There's nothing for me to dislike about this, and the fact that the more I listened to it, the more I liked it. That's always a good thing, right? It's a little disappointing when an album hits you right away and you love it, and the more you listen to it, the less appealing. It's like, okay, I get it. Like, I want to move on. It's not as interesting, right? But the albums that make you work a little bit harder for it, and that you're picking up more things in it, and but still have grooves, like still very catchy grooves. It's not like, I wouldn't say that this was homework. It definitely is one of those albums you listen to more you like, but it wasn't hard to do that. I didn't find it a chore. I was more interested to do it. So yeah, big thumbs up for me. It might have been this, or the Pixies might have been my album of the week, but maybe this a little bit more, because I kind of knew what to expect with the Pixies, whereas this was more of a surprise.
Yeah, Bjork writes really interesting lyrics too. Like some of the sound, like the visuals, like the song Deuce or Deuce. I'm sure it's a slang.
It's French. De means two.
Okay, is it? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
I'll take your word for it then. So, but she kind of like at one point gets like really like she says, but if he does, he'd want to get down from that cloud. First marzipan fingers, then marble hands, more silent than silence and slower than slow, diving towards me. Like there's a lot of my collar is huge room for two hands. They start at the chest and move slowly down. It's like, these are very interesting visuals, right?
Yeah.
Like that and it kind of like lets you know where she's headed down the road too. Mm-hmm. And you're like, this is a very interesting, like visual landscape that she's drawing. You almost have to picture things, and a lot of it is that sort of like the bunny chasing after you type of like fantasy to some degree. So so I just thought I'd throw that in there too, that stood out.
Yeah, I'm definitely, Bjork is not somebody that I really ever got into or listened to her albums. I saw some videos on MTV and was like, this chick's she's out there, man. It's got some really interesting videos. It drew me into the point where I wanted to explore it. So I'm excited to kind of get into her catalog in a couple of years.
We're going to be covering her a lot in the 90s, so get ready. Yep. Okay, any final thoughts?
That's a good call, what you said about her being like Sinead O'Connor, though, too. I mean, I found that, I really like that album. So the vocal qualities of both of them, and kind of their uniqueness, but also like their power in their voices is appealing. Yeah.
Yeah.